and welcome to One Voice. I'm your host, Andre Harrison, and thanks for joining me. This show was created to highlight key contributors to our society, like educators and entrepreneurs, different types of artists like musicians, poets, painters. It will also address issues in our community. Things like the stigma of depression and suicide amongst African American males, police interaction and your rights, health and fitness, and daily trending topics. Here's what I want you, the viewers, to do. Please follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and submit any questions, show ideas, and guests that you would like to see on the show. Thanks for watching. In many minority communities, there appears to be relational challenges between law enforcement officials and the community. My first guest is a law enforcement officer with over 15 years experience in a major metropolitan city. He chose to remain anonymous to avoid any potential issues from doing this interview. Do you feel that the police department needs to make any changes with its dealing with the community, considering what's been happening in this country recently?
Pretty much, my opinion, there's two things that need to be addressed, and I think that they're being brought to light in the media at this time because of what's been happening. Number one, the use of body-worn cameras by police officers does need to increase. It's just the reality that in any interaction between citizens and the police, there are going to be bystanders who get their cameras out, whenever anything happens, and so you're not going to necessarily get the entirety of the incident. And so police officers, to basically document from the beginning of an incident, to show exactly what happened, they're going to need to increase their use of body-worn cameras. And I think that's basically the trend that many departments are going to go to in the future. In addition to that, I think police departments need to make more of a concerted effort to make sure that their rank and file is more representative racially of the communities that they serve.
All right.
I think that there will be an inherent problem if you have communities being policed by people who do not understand and who do not come from those communities.
But then when I see the amount of minorities in the community that end up getting some charges, even as juveniles or teenagers or young adults, then that pretty much automatically makes them non-qualified to be able to join the police force. So I guess the best question would how can we get the children, really, because that's where it's going to start, to really desire to want to be a police officer and to do the right things growing up as kids? How can maybe the police department even help that to put them on that path to being able to give back to the community through law enforcement?
There need to be outreach programs that in schools. I think one of the things that I've thought about is actually having officers go into schools, teach kids about what different things are crimes. When I was growing up, somebody would say, "Oh yeah, some person got jumped," so to speak. They got jumped and maybe got their shoes taken. And growing up, I didn't necessarily think about it in terms of that person was then a victim of a crime, and what was that specific crime, and what are the penalties for that specific crime that person was the victim of. And so I think these are the type of things that need to be talked about, so that kids understand that some of the things that some people in the community are doing are actually crimes, and they're going to be, they could potentially get in trouble. They could get a criminal record. It could hamper their future opportunities in life. And then even just talking about, hey, you never know what you might want to do with your life. If you end up getting a criminal record, even as a juvenile, it doesn't just go away when you want to necessarily get a certain type of job. A police officer might be one, intelligence agency might be one, that could hamper you. It all depends. But I think it's possible that police departments could also do a better job of not automatically excluding people just because they have certain types of juvenile records. They perhaps need to look at the whole person and what they've accomplished in their life after that to determine if they're also a suitable candidate.
And you have over 15 years experience in law enforcement. As you see these countless videos, especially recently, of police brutality or shooting of unarmed men, how does that make you feel about your job and your brothers in arms, or just being in law enforcement on a whole? How does that affect you?
It's it's unfortunate anytime you see, as an officer, anytime I would see what I would believe an officer doing something that I would know to be wrong. Obviously, a lot of the videos that we do see, we don't always know that what happened before, what happened during, in the middle. We might only be seeing a certain part of the video. And so I try not to draw conclusions unless I have completely enough to make a good, assessment of what happened. But overall, I understand that every person in law enforcement, every citizen who's not in law enforcement are humans. And humans make mistakes. The hiring process is not perfect. Certain types of people who perhaps should not be hired as police officers get hired as police officers. People who should be hired as police officers will get hired, and sometimes they'll make mistakes. For whatever is going on with them or in their life, there are going to be mistakes made. Overall, there are so many different encounters between police and citizens every day, and what we end up seeing that comes on the internet or comes on the news is only a small fraction.
Right.
Now, obviously, there's more of these things that don't get captured on video, but overall, there's still a very, very small fraction of what's actually occurring between citizens and the police. Some of which is bad and shouldn't be happening. Most of which is what should be happening.
Right. What are the challenges you face daily with the community in terms of doing your job to the best of your ability? What challenges do you find to be most prevalent in the community?
Most recently, the challenges that I've seen is just people not wanting to cooperate during investigations. That's probably the biggest challenge, and it goes back to a whole no snitching or don't snitch mentality. That issue is such a complex issue. That mentality of the person who's telling being the bad guy, sometimes it can be true, but a lot of times, it's been co-opted, not just to mean somebody who is actually doing something against the majority of the community, but it's been co-opted to mean anybody who cooperates with law enforcement, even though the person they may be telling on is the most horrible person and damaging the community, to the greatest extent possible. And so that whole mentality just needs to be talked about, discussed with kids from an early age to try to, root that out and understand that cooperating with law enforcement, helping law enforcement to get people out of the community who are doing harm to the community is a good thing.
I'm going to piggyback off that, because from the community standpoint, they feel that in law enforcement, the same thing happens, that there are some rogue officers on the force or officers that abuse their powers, and nobody else is speaking out about it. Like you've heard the term blue wall of silence.
Right.
And I'd like you to explain what really happens on the force, because I believe a lot of civilians don't really know the actual protocol of what's actually happening with some of those officers, because like you said, all we see are these small instances of extreme behavior when there's millions of interactions with the community every day.
Right. Let me distinguish first between if there is an officer not telling on another officer versus a citizen in the community not telling on another citizen in the community. Number one, the citizen in the community who's not telling on the other citizen the person who is doing that crime is actually doing something against the community.
Right.
Potentially even has harmed that particular individual who is now a victim of a crime and who now will get stigmatized by other members of the community by not reporting the crime that occurred against them.
Right.
And as if they're expected to just take it and either retaliate on their own or just sit back and take it. A police officer who is not telling on another police officer, in theory, what's occurring is that police officer has done something against a member of the community per se, and another officer perhaps is not telling on that officer.
Right.
That's the difference. Now, obviously, like I said before, there are humans involved in all of these interactions. There are going to be officers who are potentially not going to want to speak up in certain situations where they may feel like another officer has done wrong. The fear I think that many officers would have, depending on the type of situation that's going on. Well, number one, let me address a clear-cut case of wrongdoing.
Okay.
Like, let's say 100%, you know exactly what happened, you saw what happened, and you can prove it. You had evidence and you could prove it. I think many more officers would be willing to go report misconduct of that sort because they fully understand what happened, they have the proof, and they can report it, and everybody will see that they were right when they made that report. I think an officer may be apprehensive to report something they think might be wrongdoing when it might actually not be wrongdoing. Okay. The reality is that as officers, we're required to back each other up. We're required to go out on the street, interact with people. You know, sometimes things may get out of hand. We might call for backup, and you're expecting somebody to come in to help you,
right?
Potentially to help save your life if you need that. And the reality is, if you're known as somebody who frivolously, I would say, makes accusations against other officers, it may put some hesitation, and officers don't want to even be near you because they might feel like if they do something that you find is questionable, even though they think they did the right thing, that you might report on them.
All right.
Now, I'm not saying that officers shouldn't report on other officers. I'm just saying that this is the reality of humanity, you know, humans being police officers, that anybody in that position is going to have second thoughts about, you know, potentially making false accusations or potentially, you know, being put in a position where their personal safety could be jeopardized by making a report that can't be substantiated or they can't prove. Do I think that it's wrong? Absolutely it's wrong. If an officer sees another officer do something, they think it's wrong, they need to report it. Okay. So that if there is a pattern of behavior of a specific officer and enough reports get made, then, you know, I think that management can go in and investigate it where an officer who made that report doesn't feel like they're necessarily being put at risk in the event those charges are not substantiated.